In 1550, a debate transpired in Spain over the rights to enslave the native peoples in the newly conquered lands, including Mexico, under the Encomienda System. But first, we turn back the clock and examine the treaty sanctioned by Pope Julius II, which divided newly explored territories, including North America, between Portugal and Spain. And now, let's better understand the Encomienda System in Mexico with the help of Melvin Bragg and his guest historians on the In Our Time podcast.
In 1550, at royal command, two sides met in Valladolid in Spain to debate the future of slavery in the new Spanish colonies in the Americas. One, following Aristotle, argued that native people were natural slaves who went with the land and should stay slaves. The other argued that others might be slaves, but these were Spanish subjects and should be treated as equals. This defender of Native American rights was Bartolomé de las Casas, and some say he was one of the first proponents of human rights anywhere. Columbus in 1492, then Cortés, and Spanish went over and conquered the Aztecs, which was the start of the great movement of Spain into that part of the world.
They go into the Caribbean following Columbus in 1492, and then by the 1520s they're starting to expand across the mainland, conquering large areas of territory in Central America.
And it appears to the Spanish and to many people as almost a miraculous victory over so many people by so few.
Yes, and that's how it's been talked about since, that this is these few conquistadors and missionaries conquering huge areas of territory. It's a grand myth of conquest by an evangelical army.
Yes, but they had guns, the others didn't, and cannons, the others didn't, and horses, the others didn't, and they also made allies with other tribes.
That's true. I would say that the technology actually is relatively minor, in my opinion. The two big factors are disease, because the indigenous people don't have any natural resistance to European diseases, and also the alliances with other indigenous groups.
The Spanish exported the Encomienda System to the new territories. What was that, and why is it important?
The Encomienda System is a way of granting groups of indigenous people to specific Spaniards or institutions. It comes from the Spanish verb encomendar, which means to entrust. And theoretically, it's a reciprocal system where a Spaniard gives Christianity and civilization and protection to a group of indigenous people in exchange for tribute from them in the form of labour or gold or goods that they produce. In reality, it becomes a kind of forced labour service, and it also extends to their land in reality. Very often, if you're given a village to look after, you essentially take their lands. So some people have compared it to slavery, although the Encomienda Indians, as they're called at the time, actually have rather more legal rights than an enslaved person would.
And that's what we're going to try to explore, whether it was slavery or whether there weren't slaves, and a huge debate really underneath it all between what is a slave, who is a slave and who is not a slave, and how do they arrive at those different descriptions or destinations. You went there as a conquistador. There weren't many of you. Did you have a piece of paper from the king? What was going on?
Essentially, you had a piece of paper from the king. It goes back to Columbus discovering the land. By right of discovery, the Spanish crown go to the Pope, and in 1493, the Pope gives them a papal bull called Inter Caetera. And that grants them the land on condition they evangelise it. And this is important for understanding the Encomienda, because a lot of what the Spanish do in this period is about evangelisation and proving they're doing that. But in practice, on the ground, you need a contract from the Crown giving you the right to either explore or to conquer or to settle, and there are slightly different kinds of contracts from the Crown.
The Pope claims authority over all the land in the world that is not Christianised. He owns it, and you have to get his permission to move in it.
There's a big debate about the right of what's called dominion, the right to rule in your own lands. The Pope doesn't claim to have the complete secular right of dominion, the right to rule everywhere, but he claims to have the right to tell people where they can go and teach the faith. And then there are big debates about the ways it's legitimate to do that. Can you use force or not?
So you go with this piece of paper, literally, and you say, I'm allowed this lot of land, there's a lot of people on it, these people belong to me and they will do what I say.
Pretty much. And from 1513, when they invent a document called the requirement, the requerimiento, they kind of literally do that. From 1513, to legitimate the conquest, you turn up with a copy of the requirement, the requerimiento, and you read it out. And it says, basically, here's a potted history of the world according to Christianity. God gave the world to the Pope gave it to the Spanish have given the right to come here to me. Would you accept that and agree to listen to the faith? And if you don't, then we're allowed to make war on you.
You read it out to whom?
to the indigenous people. Considered to be a legitimating act, something that made your conquest legal. You were actually supposed to do it in front of a notary. Someone was supposed to write down that you'd fulfilled this requirement.
In the short term and immediate term, what impact did the Spanish have on the peoples they encountered in that part of America, Mexico, and around the Caribbean?
It's not only the Spanish, for example, who bring in their diseases, which the Native Americans would not have had immunity to, but also, even more important, livestock. And so you start getting two things happening, really. The exploitation of the labour force in an obsession to find gold, which is the one other thing we need to mention here. The belief that gold would be found, even in the Caribbean islands and certainly in the mainland. This comes to be as vital as the evangelization project. And both of them are seen as sort of central interests of the Spanish monarchy and then of the Habsburg Empire as it becomes part of that.
Is the evangelization a real purpose, or is it a blind?
If you look at the records that we've got, like some of the major writers, some of whom were conquistadors, who did the conquering themselves, the ones who were not ordained or religious churchmen, they were sincere, totally. The others, the secular colonists, as it were, often were simply conventional Spanish Christians of their own day. I think we have to bear in mind also that a lot of mental baggage comes with the Spaniards when they go to the New World, including feudalism, which really underlies the encomienda thing. In other words, serfdom as well as actual slavery, but also the great shortages of bullion and resources. And when Columbus starts out, for example, the first thing he does is try and find any little nugget of gold he can see to prove to Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs, that they were justified in funding his expeditions.
Was the drive to conversion a very respectable cover for the drive to find gold and exploit the people there? Or was it part of it in a profound way?
I think this is a tough thing about the mentality of the period, in which it genuinely is impossible to separate the religious motives from what we would call the economic ones.
Bartolomé de las Casas was one of the owners of these properties. His father had sailed with Columbus. What abuses did he report? He's very important to the story. What abuses did he report in the beginning?
It was actually another member of the order he joined, the Dominican Order of Friars, Alonso de Montesinos, who first publicly denounced the behaviour of the colonists. He started off by going for the abuse of the grants that had been made. In other words, the labour force was being overexploited, as well as any problems about disease, which we mentioned. And Las Casas seems to have had a conversion in two senses. One is that he converts literally, which just was the term, by becoming a Dominican friar. And of course, this was the very active preaching order from Europe, which had already combated heresy. It was founded to do so, in fact, in the 13th century. So what we have now is them among the Gentiles, as it were, the people who'd never had Christianity. On the abuses question, yes, it is the beginning of Las Casas' crusade.
The Pope had granted the right, indeed the duty, not only to conquer but to convert. How did the conversion happen? How did they set about doing it?
To understand the importance of conversion for the Spanish Empire, we need to go back to this papal bull of 1493 in Caetera, which in fact granted the donation of the lands in 100 leagues west of the Cape Verde Islands to the Spanish crown for the purposes of conversion. So the mandate for conversion was central to the founding legitimacy of the Spanish Empire. Now, what happened was there was a debate about how that conversion should be carried out and the methodology of that conversion. Particularly between the Franciscans and the Dominicans, there was a clash about the methodology of that conversion. And the Franciscans had been engaged with mass baptisms, and the Dominicans came along and said this wasn't a real conversion because the Amerindians couldn't understand what had happened. They hadn't been brought to the faith by reason. This is significant because Bartolomé de las Casas joined the Dominican order and he joined this debate. And significantly, in 1537, he published a tract, De Unico Modo, the only way of converting people to the true faith, in which he argued that it was really important to bring people to the faith by reason through peaceful proselytizing. Now, there's three important implications of that text that he publishes. It shows there's no mandate for force, that people need to be compelled through peaceful methodologies. This also has implications for the political sphere because it ties into later arguments about the need to have consent for sovereignty. And it also ties in, interestingly, to the way he's been fitted into the intellectual history of rights, in that it focuses on the importance of the will, so that people must be free to choose and have their freedom respected in this.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.